Let me first introduce the members of our fine panel, where today we're going to delve into the recent conservative victories in Australia, New Zealand, and Chile. Starting at the beginning here with Joe DeJoux from the National Party, now the majority party in New Zealand. So please welcome Joe DeJoux. Our wonderful friends at the Liberal Party of Australia the staff is led by Federal Director Andrew Hurst. Please welcome Andrew Hurst. And ever since the election results in Chile, Diego Schalper is standing even taller than he already is after that great victory. Please welcome Member of Congress Diego Schalper from Chile. Given our recent experience with AI, I'm going to start off this topic with another video.
Tides of political victories shift. What makes a party successful? Welcome to the IDU Forum, where today we're dissecting recent conservative victories across the globe. Our journey begins in Australia, where the Liberal Party triumphed over the Voice to Parliament referendum. Next, we head to Chile, where Conservatives staved off a radical new constitution. Finally, we'll touch down in New Zealand, where the National Party staged a dramatic comeback. Let's unravel these victories one by one and understand the elements of their success. First, we journey to the sun-baked landscapes of Australia. Here, the Liberal Party, with its solid conservative principles, managed to turn the tides against the Voice to Parliament referendum. This was no easy feat. The referendum, championed by the Labour government, was an attempt to change the dynamics of the country's political landscape. But the Liberals, with their strategic campaigns and compelling arguments, managed to sway public opinion. The implications of this victory are profound. It not only reaffirms the strength of conservative values, but also sends a clear message that change must be guided by the principles of individual liberty and economic stability. A remarkable win for the Liberals indeed, but the political tides were also turning elsewhere. Next, we pivot to the vibrant land of Chile. Here, a radical new constitution was poised to drastically reshape the nation's landscape. This proposed constitution carried with it potential risks that could have jeopardized the country's economy and individual liberties, steering Chile in a direction reminiscent of Venezuela. However, the country's conservatives rose to the occasion, spearheaded by the likes of Diego Schalper, a member of Congress, and a leader of the campaign against the referendum. Their diligent efforts and strategic campaigning led to the defeat of this constitution, preventing a potential crisis. A victory that safeguarded the country's economy and individual liberties, a story of resilience and foresight. Finally, we hop across the Tasman Sea to New Zealand, a land known for its stunning landscapes, passionate rugby fans, and now a political comeback for the ages. The National Party of New Zealand had been in opposition for a few years, but they never lost sight of their goal. Their relentless campaigning, focused on key issues such as economic stability and individual liberties, resonated with the Kiwis. They promised a government that would listen to its people, and the people responded. The October elections proved to be a turning point, with the National Party overcoming the odds and reclaiming power. A comeback story like no other, a testament to the National Party's tenacity. From Australia to Chile and New Zealand, these victories narrate tales of strategic planning, resilience, and dedication. Each win showcases the power of robust campaigning, a deep understanding of voter concerns, and adherence to core conservative principles. These are not just victories. They are lessons in political strategy, perseverance, and the power of conservative values. The Leadership Institute and the IDU congratulate the IDU member parties in Australia, New Zealand, and Chile on these victories. Now let's delve into them to see how we can apply the lessons learned worldwide.
So let's do just that, and ladies first. Let's start with New Zealand. So the victories in Australia and in Chile were in referenda, but in New Zealand this was a regular general election campaign. But all of these victories are stunning in their own way, and we were all delighted to see this tremendous victory. So, Joe, you were at the center of this. You and I met in Australia earlier in the year. We talked about this a little bit. So, can you tell us what happened and why are you the new majority party in New Zealand?
I'll start at the very beginning, which is that in 2020, we were completely devastated at that election. We got 25% of the vote and 33 MPs. The Labour Party got a supermajority, 50% of the party vote. We have a system very, very similar to Germany's, mixed member proportional. So they got a supermajority in a system not designed to deliver supermajorities. So we were just completely wiped out. But basically, over 3 years, and COVID played a role in this, in non-delivery of COVID, we also at that time obviously had Jacinda Ardern. She's a global superstar. But New Zealanders just fell out of love with a Labour government that actually couldn't deliver. It couldn't focus on the issues that mattered to them. And we were relentlessly focused on voters and their issues. And so at this election on the 14th of October, we turned around our disastrous defeat from 2020 into a 38% of the party vote and 48 MPs. And what's remarkable about that is that is the biggest swing in a single term in New Zealand's history.
So when I circle back, I'm going to go a little deeper into why. But first, let's take a look at what happened in nearby Australia. Andrew, we visited with each other a couple months ago when we were down there. It was the Labour government that put forward this voice to Parliament, which most people in this room probably need a refresher in terms of what that is. So can you walk us through just what was this referendum? Why did the Labour government think this was going to pass? And then what happened?
Thanks, Ron. So yeah, we had a referendum on exactly the same day as the New Zealand election, 14th of October. And again, to go back in time a bit, the Labor government was elected last May. They came to government after being out of power for 9 years. And while they had quite a low primary vote, it was a reasonably strong victory in that our vote went back quite a bit, even though they had only a small majority in Parliament. But one of their key priorities was to establish this thing called the Indigenous Voice to Parliament. And I guess a key motivation of that was delivering what has been talked about in Australia for the last 20, 25 years around Indigenous recognition in our Constitution, which might sound like a nice, respectful thing to do. But the way they went about it was not just to put a simple statement of recognition in the Constitution or the preamble of the Constitution, but they proposed to put a whole new chapter in the Constitution, a brand new chapter that would have set up a permanent advisory body that would advise both the Parliament and the executive government on matters relating to Indigenous Australians, which was a very big change, probably the biggest change we would have put in place to our Constitution since its creation in 1901. But it was a key sort of priority of the new government, and early on it had massive, but probably superficial, but massive public support in the opinion polls. Through the sort of second half of last year, in terms of the polling, it had anywhere between 65% and 80% of Australians saying that they would support it. And that continued for quite some time until the debate really got interesting earlier this year. So that's the context, and that's why the new Labor government thought that it would be successful, and why they put a lot of energy into it. But while there was, as I said, very strong superficial support, you could see even at the end of last year and at the start of this year, in the qualitative work we were doing, that while there was support and it was motivated by Australians wanting to do the right thing by their Indigenous fellow Australians, there was a complete lack of understanding of what the proposal was, and B, a very large willingness to change their view from support to oppose once they heard the arguments about why it wasn't a good idea. But up to that point, they hadn't heard any of those arguments. So that's the context, and that's where Labor started off the debate.
So you went into this 20 points down. Your coalition partners, the National Party, weighed in a little more quickly against it. It took your party a little longer to oppose it. Did the Liberal Party weighing in on that, was that a big deal? In other words, did voters say, oh, this is a big deal that this major political party is weighing in against it?
Yeah, I think that's right. So the National Party, our coalition colleagues, sort of the rural party that has about, I don't know, 15 seats in Parliament, it took a position in November last year. I think it's fair to say partly driven by the advocacy of one of their senators, Jacinta Nampijira-Price, who's who's an Indigenous woman from Alice Springs, but a very powerful advocate. But I might come back to her later because she's key to this whole thing. But the Liberal Party didn't settle its position until April this year. That was, I think, a defining point. It's the point at which, while the support in polling was coming down before that, it probably accelerated after that. And it certainly meant that that the party could campaign more vigorously against the Voice. And also, the history in Australia is that we've had 44 and 45 with the Voice attempts to change the Constitution, and only 8 have been successful, and virtually impossible to get up when there isn't bipartisan support. So notwithstanding that big sort of 70, 75%, 80% public support, once the Liberal Party took the position, history was on our side, but there's still a hell of a lot of work to do.
So in Australia, you had Conservatives lost the national election, the left comes in, and they bet it all on a referendum that requires the support of the people. It's the very similar story of what we've seen in Chile. You had a new, communist, vegetarian president come in, and he wants to change the constitution right away, and he moves that forward. He bets it all, and it doesn't go well. Can you share a little bit more about that context and what happened? But don't tell the second chapter of the story, because that's even more interesting, and we'll get to that before the end of the panel. There's a very interesting chapter 2 of this story.
I don't know if a good second chapter. Well, thank you for the invitation. My central message, Ron, is to share with you how we defeat the left in the constitutional referendum last year. I think that it is a mix between being strategic, work hard, and believe in our ideas. We have to have the conviction that people live better with our ideas, and to have to promote them, wake up them, organize them, and that was very important for us. To understand how the left work in our country, in 2019, Chile was under attack in 2 ways. In a violent way, we have a social protest that was organized and coordinated by radical left communist movements. They wanted that, and they promote a coup d'etat against President Piñera. They wanted to bring down the government. That was the idea, and they burned metro stations, they burned public transportation, churches, all what you can imagine. And in another way, the group of Puebla, as a moderate left wing, they used the modus operandi that they use in all the countries. They present a constitutional way as a democratic way, but this is a cover to take control of the different institutions and organizations. And they say the only way to stop the violence is to make a constitutional process. And President Piñera and we couldn't stop the violence, and we have to accept this constitutional process. They took control of the council that was in charge to write this constitutional proposal. This proposal would mean for Chile that they would destroy everything that we have known. They eliminate the Senate. They destroy the unity of the country and build a plurinational country. They destroy the democracy, everything. And we had the last part of this process was a referendum that took place in September 2022, and Chile said no to the left. The 62% of the Chilean people vote against this left constitutional process, and that was very important for us because we made a very specific campaign to say to the people that he has to believe in freedom, has to believe in democracy, has to believe in the last 30 years of Chilean history, and we won. It was a good news for us.
So we see this pattern all the time where the left comes in and they're elected under one set of rules, and then once they come in and say, well, now that we're in, we have to change the Constitution. And magically, that's always done in a way that would put conservatives at a disadvantage and individual liberties at a disadvantage, and so on. And was there the same factor in Chile that Andrew talked about in Australia, in that was there a lot of confusion over this, and the confused voter voted no, or was this a matter that everyone knew exactly what this was and they voted no?
No. The campaign has 3 ideas that were very important. First, we made a specific message to the women, to the people in the city, to young people, explaining how this constitutional proposal will be destroying all freedoms, all property, democracy, saying it honestly. This constitutional proposal will change your life in a spectacular way, and we said to each target how this constitutional proposal will affect their lives first. We make a frame that you have to vote between dictatorship or democracy. Your decision has to be, you have to make a decision between freedom or not freedom, and at least the people that were for the constitutional proposal, I don't know how to explain it, but they were against Chile. They destroyed the flag, they burned flags, they made a new flag with this plurinational Chile, and people doesn't accept that because the people in Chile has a good idea of the last 30 years. We don't are against our history. We have things that we have to do better, of course, and we make a dilemma between you are against Chile or you are supporting Chile. And this difference was very important for us, and it was very impressive for us that many people used the Chilean flag as the principal campaign object.
So you have the strongest economy in South America, in Chile, and people decided that's going to keep us in the right direction. Now let me go back to Joe, because I want to key off of something that Rick, who was sitting in my seat in the last panel, Rick made the point that there are leftists, I can't say liberals because our liberal friends here are the conservatives, but there are leftist governments all around the world that are screwing up all kinds of things, and they get reelected all the time. Why was that not the case in New Zealand?
Well, I think from our perspective, we had really good research from the outset, so that was key for us. So we ran a research-led campaign, and what that told us was that the top 3 issues for New Zealanders were cost of living, the state of our economy, and law and order, more or less. Law and order was certainly cemented by the end of the campaign. And our equities, according to voters, were that we were the best able to manage cost of living and the economy and restore law and order. So it was a happy sort of marriage in regards to those things. And then our job was to get our voters and voters who were leaning towards us to vote with their heads and not their hearts. And I think what happens with left parties is that they get their voters to vote with their hearts on their equities instead of the things that actually are personally relevant to them at the time. And for us, in New Zealand, Kiwis are struggling still. They were struggling and they still are. They were sick of rising crime. They were sick of ram raids, smash and grabs every 15 hours. They were sick of paying high mortgage rates. They were sick of paying for high groceries. And we were just relentless in regards to those messages. And we had to get Kiwis to vote with their heads and not their hearts.
So you had the strength or the advantage of your greatest point of strength happened to correspond to the incumbent's greatest point of weakness.
Absolutely.
And we're playing that out. Mm-hmm. So that becomes clear on a thematic level. I'm wondering, on a campaign level, were there things that you did differently than the last campaign, or was it all carried on to thematics? Was there operationally, did you strengthen your party structure? Did you run the campaign differently? And what I'm getting at is, what are the lessons that people from other IDU member parties can take so that they can replicate your victory?
Yeah, so in terms of the organisation, I think three things. One, we raised money early and a lot earlier than we had before so that we could establish our campaign team earlier than we ever had before. And that's because we were wiped out in 2020. And I think people forget that when you lose so badly, you lose your resources, you lose your local infrastructure, you lose funding that comes via MPs. So we had to rebuild the entire campaign operation. So we raised money early, we got the campaign team established early. The money led us by great research and digital/social media advice. And we selected our candidates early so that we could rebuild our local organisations with someone to rally around. It's much easier to build your local organisation when you've got someone, and that someone can bring in fresh blood and new volunteers and other people into the organisation to supplement what's already there.
So if the four resources that a campaign has are time, people, money, and data, the most valuable of those is time, and both of the points that you just made were to make better use of time. Start raising money earlier and nominate your candidates earlier. So Andrew, I'm curious, as we pivot back to Australia, if you're the incumbent Labour Party, this was a really big risk that they took in terms of, now that they've been defeated in that referendum, has that better positioned you for the next federal election, which is next year? That's question one. And the follow-on is, are there things that you were able to get out of that campaign? Did you build lists? Did you do other things that put you in a better, even stronger position beyond just the thematic fact that Labour lost?
So a couple of points. It looks like a risk now. It probably didn't look like a risk, 12, 18 months ago when it was incredibly popular, but it ultimately turned out to be a big risk. And interestingly, if you track just the published polling in terms of support for the Voice going from here, 60, 70, 80%, ended at 39%. And if you track the Labor Prime Minister's net approval rating over the same period of time, they're parallel lines. They've gone down at the same rate. One's mirrored the other. Now, there are other factors as well. There's obviously, as in many other countries, if not all countries, there's big cost of living pressures, high inflation in Australia, which has been another big impact on the government and the Labor Prime Minister's standing. And it also, I think, has really demonstrated to a lot of voters that Albanese, the Prime Minister, has had the wrong priorities through this period. At a time when people are doing it tough, at a time when there's real challenges in the world, but particularly the domestic economic pain people are going through, he spent a lot of his political capital and a lot of his time talking about an issue that really was not in the top 5, 6, 7 more issues for many, many voters. So the demonstration that through that period he just really wasn't focused on the right priorities has been quite damaging. In terms of lists and benefits longer term, there's a big opportunity for us in that there's a cohort of voters, around 30% of people who voted Labor at the last election who voted no on October 14. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily all going to come across to us in the next election, but it's an opportunity to talk to those voters because they've been willing to vote against a progressive cause and they've been willing to vote against a cause championed by the party and the leader they typically vote for. So there's an opportunity, and we've done some data work which tells us what those voters look like, so it's a really big opportunity for us to speak to those voters. And they've been on the same side of an argument as our team and our leader, Peter Dutton, and our advocates out there in the community. So an opportunity. In terms of lists, yeah, I mean, this is an issue that mobilised. So not only were Labor voters not supporting it, but it mobilised and motivated our supporters, probably like nothing we've seen in at least 10 years, if not longer, in terms of engaging with our social media content, in terms of donating, in terms of signing up for various events and lists. It was an issue that mobilised our people like we haven't seen since probably Tony Abbott was coming in, fighting the carbon tax and stopping the boats, and maybe longer. It really energised our people, and so there's an opportunity again for us to keep those people engaged and connected to the party. But again, these are all just opportunities. There's nothing guaranteed about how this plays out down the track.
So this victory showed your own party members that you could win, but it showed them that before the next federal election. Whereas otherwise they might say, well, no government has been turned out after one term. We're not going to win the next time. We're in really bad shape. Labor's doing well, but the other team places a big bet. They lose the bet, and now you have the momentum instead of them.
It's also a really interesting example of where message defeated money. So the Yes campaign had sort of obscene levels of corporate support, civil society support. There were big banks, big mining companies, airlines giving licks of $2 million a pop to the Yes campaign. Qantas was giving free flights to the Yes campaign volunteers. They were giving nothing to the No campaign. The Yes campaign would have outspent the No campaign 3 to 1, possibly 4, 5 to 1. We won't know till all the returns come out. But they had a flawed product, they sold it badly, they never had a clear message, and ultimately, the common sense of the Australian people saw through what was a bad product with no message, won out over a very big corporate-funded campaign that was not well run.
So message defeated money
Yeah.
in this case, and you took advantage of the fact that this could potentially result in a setback for the governing party, which would change the political dynamic in the country. Diego, let me ask you a similar question, and what I want to get to is we want to pull out of this the practical lessons that could be learned that other parties should learn from. What are some of the aspects? My second question is going to be that. My first question is going to be to key off of something that Andrew just said. Was there big money behind the Yes side on the referendum? The corporate sector, have they been bought off, or did the private sector stay off to the side, or how was the Yes campaign funded in that referendum? So that's my first question. The second one is the lessons that can be taken out of that.
When I as one of the leaders of the campaign, I wanted to share, Ron, 5 ideas that could be useful for the other parties, and one of these ideas has to do with the role of the private sector. The first is that winning a campaign is very important to present our ideas, freedom, democracy, as common sense. Common sense. And to present the ideas of the left parties as an aggression against common sense. That's very important, and if you run a campaign, it's very important to make this difference. The second idea for us was very important to build a coalition for democracy. That all the people, leaders, NGOs, private sector, parties, it doesn't matter how you vote for a candidate, but in this referendum, you have 2 chances. You have to be for Chile or against Chile, and to make a big coalition. The third is, I think that it's very important to define which is the frame of the election, which is the question for the voters. In our case was, you are for democracy or you are for dictatorship. And nobody wants to be for dictatorship, That's why we make in the mind of the voters, which is your way, and I think that it is very important. For us was very important the role of the private sector. We talk with them, we explain them how these constitutional proposals will be unavailable, the economic growth, the economic development, and they understood that, and we make so specific crowdfunding system with a lot of people that give not too much money, but to support the campaign. For us, it was very important too to work in the territories. I know that a lot of us, we work in the social network, and that is very important, but for us in Chile, it was very important to work with the people, to listen to them, to be close to them, to organize them in the different places, and that was very important for the campaign. And at least we work with civil society groups. We have to understand that left create thousands of NGOs, civil social groups. You have group for whatever you want, and in our side we don't have do a lot about this. And in this campaign we made more than 800 different of groups, women's, youngs, I don't know.
800 different coalition groups.
Yes.
Okay.
For this specific referendum, and that's very important because people wants to see not only political parties, wants to see a big coalition of people that is for an idea. And here we built a coalition for democracy, and you want to be in the side of democracy. That's why for us it was very important to present our ideas as common sense.
So the Liberals in Australia delivered a bloody nose to the other team with this referendum. What was the impact of the referendum failing on your leftist president? And how is he looking in the polls now compared to before?
Bueno, one of the things that we had to do is to say we are against this proposal. Well, we compromised to make a new proposal. This is the second chapter of the story. A new proposal that will promote our ideas. And we make a second council. We have now a second proposal. It will be voted in 8 days. And we hope that it would be, now we are in the other side of the story. We have to promote that people vote for this new proposal. But we win in this council, this second council that write this second proposal. We have 32 members for 50, you say? 32 for 50? We have a big majority in this council. We have promoted a constitution that promotes a fight against terrorism, a fight against criminality, to empower the people, and we hope that in 8 days more we will win again. It will be a difficult election.
So I'm going to come back to New Zealand just a second, but since you kind of let the cat out of the bag, I just want to understand this clearly. So leftist president comes in, says we have to change the constitution because we want to be more like Venezuela. So he creates this constitutional council. The left dominates the constitutional council. They put forward a proposed constitution that would obliterate individual liberty and so on, and you defeat that. Then they come back and say, okay, we'll do it again. Then you guys, from my understanding, run a slate of candidates who wanted to have no change to the Constitution at all, and you win the majority of the council to change the Constitution. And so then you take that process, put forward a more conservative Constitution than what you have now, and now you have a second referendum, and you're on the yes side, and the guy who started this whole thing is on the no side, trying to preserve the current Constitution.
So today the President Boric is against the new proposal, yes. The communists are against our proposal because now we have a proposal. So our idea is that we have an electoral win. Now we have to have an ideological win. And that's why it's so important to us that this new proposal consolidate the win that we have 1 year ago.
So do you think he regrets having started this whole process in the first place? Or are you going to make him regret that he started this whole process in the first place?
No, good question. When we think that the only way that we close this problem is to win in 8 days more. But only here, if we lose, it's not so terrible. If we had lost 1 year ago, it would be terrible for Chile. Now, the problem for Boric is that he is promoting I would say it in a radical way. He's promoting the constitution from Pinochet. And that for Gabriel Boric is unbelievable, you know? And that's, now the two possibilities, we win with a very good constitution or we lose with a good constitution.
And that's a great position to be in. Let me pivot back to New Zealand. What is the National Party really good at that other political parties in the IDU should emulate?
Well, this last election, we worked really hard on our social media and our social media strategy. So there was some conversation about that in the last panel or in the AI panel. And we worked really hard to build equity across our existing channels at the outset and create new ones, namely TikTok. We led the way in that. There was still a lot of concern about using TikTok. We just felt that we had to be there. We did try to launch it earlier in the campaign, but there was a lot of bad media, so we delayed it. And then by the start of late 2022, we were on to TikTok, and we were lucky in that our leader was exceptional. He totally embraced it, and he was excellent. He made excellent content. And there was some talk in the last panel about sign-off processes. We had one meeting a day, and I did it at 4:15 every afternoon, and the guys are busy all day creating their content, and then they'd put it up at the meeting, and I'd just go yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And basically, we just built that trust in regards, we put parameters around it. No copyright. We've had masses of issues with copyright. No copyright. No offensive content, obviously. Make sure it's on message in terms of our issues and our equities. What else? Basically, if I get it, we shouldn't run it because I'm not the target audience, right? So there was sand cutting videos and there was weird stuff with our guy in his underwear, and I was like, what? But people loved it, and the audience that it was.
The staff show me social media posts all the time. I'm like, I have no idea what you're showing me. No, exactly. No, the young people really love it. I'm like, okay, I take your word for it.
Yeah, so we went with it, and we outpolled Labor in the 18 to 24-year-old age group. We've never done that before. So
you won the plurality in 18 to 20.
The Greens, to be fair, won. They got 30%. We got 29%, and Labor got 27%. So, yeah, it was extraordinary.
So, Andrew, we've been visited with you multiple times. I think the Liberal Party in Australia is a model for the world. Every centre-right party should understand how well organized the Liberal Party is. We never feel like we're the most organized, but you know, it's very evident how organized and structured and how together you have it. For the benefit of the other IDU member parties, what do you think that you do really well that other parties would benefit from emulating in terms of what's the aspect that you really realize we really have it together in this area?
Doesn't always feel like we are the model for every party. What do we do well? So, I mean, firstly, and relating to the voice, firstly, you know, we work in the back room, we run campaigns, we do all that, but ultimately it's our leaders and our members who have to go and make the case in the public, who are our advocates and who, through many generations, have been very effective at representing the Australian people and getting out there and making an argument. Peter Dutton, who's our leader, managed this process very well, where he was out in January this year calling for detail on the voice. Before we formally opposed it, he was calling for detail. He was asking questions. He wrote to the Prime Minister in January. He set out 15 questions in terms of how the voice would operate. Still to this day, no one knows the answers to those questions. And that was what, 4 months before we formally opposed it. And then at the time that we opposed the voice, shortly afterwards, Peter Dutton also promoted Jacinta Price, who I referred to before, to become our opposition spokesperson on Indigenous affairs. She was absolutely key to the outcome. And I'm sort of not quite answering the question, but I think it's a point that needs to be made. She was an incredibly powerful advocate, and it was an Indigenous Australian woman saying and representing the fact that many Indigenous Australians did not want this. It was incredibly powerful. Her advocacy was very powerful, but it was a very powerful demonstration for a lot of Australians to hear from her and from other Indigenous leaders that this is not something they wanted, and I think that's absolutely essential to the outcome. So I think we've got great team of parliamentarians who are very effective in the public sphere. I think generally we run competent campaigns built on the fundamentals of, as Joe says, informed by research. Message comes first. We seek to do whatever we can to be at the cutting edge of campaign techniques, not always, but we seek to do our best in that regard, and certainly working with the Leadership Institute and IDU and sister parties is a really important part of that,
Yeah, I think one element which is common to what Joe just spoke to and what you're speaking to is leadership is a factor. And that is, you can have a party that is well organized, well structured, but if you don't have sound leadership, then the rest of that will just consistently underperform. And Diego, do you see the same thing? Was leadership a factor? Because I would imagine that there was, given that this was all done when you're out of power, it's very easy for all that to be fragmented all over the place. So if I could ask you, what role did leadership play in being able to move forward a successful campaign here?
Bueno, I think that today we have a very different kind of groups in the society, and Chile is not a different place. That's why we don't have a specific leader. We had a lot of leaders, women, young people, people that work in, I don't know, in the private sector, social people that work in an NGO. We had more than, I don't know, when you saw the movies on TV or in the social media, we have different kind of leaders talking the same idea. You have to make a decision. You are supporting Chile or you are against Chile. In Chile, we have people, for example, los guasos. That is something very from my country. That is people that works in a farm. It's very normal and say something like this: supporting democracy and supporting freedom is our common sense. Please be with us. Please vote for Chile. And that's the idea. And a lot of people saying the same things was the main idea of the campaign, and that's why we won with 62%. That was unbelievable for us, because a lot of people with different stories, with different ideas, with different, wanted the same thing for Chile.
Joe, I went to a meeting of the Republican Governors Association, which is the trade association of Republican governors, similar to this, but all the Republican governors get together. And it was then Governor Chris Christie who got up and he was speaking to all the newly elected Republican governors. And he said, when you come into power for the first time, you should take whatever the big things are you want to get done and do them at the beginning, because you'll never be more popular than you are on day one. And Christie went on to say, you're going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of people who are going to say, no, 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 preserve your capital, keep your powder dry, and so on. And meanwhile, your ability to get those things done will diminish. So what comes next? Now that you're in power, what will your party do to improve the quality of life for people in New Zealand? What comes next now that you've won?
Well, I agree with that completely. We were elected on a platform of delivering and getting things done. We absolutely have to get some runs on the board quickly. Otherwise, we're just like the last guys. So we've released a 100-day plan. We're doing as much as we can before Christmas, releasing a mini budget. The big plank of our campaign was tax cuts. We're absolutely delivering on those. We are going through the public sector and reducing reckless, wasteful spending, reducing headcount, and we're going to work really hard to get inflation down and therefore the cost of living, and lower people's mortgages and lower their groceries, etc., and that will take time. So we've got to get runs on the board in the interim so that people keep faith with us and they can see that we're delivering. Also, law and order was another massive plank for us. So we are implementing our law and order policies within the first 100 days, and those are banning gang patches in public so that gangs can't coalesce, tougher penalties for gangs, search warrants, all sorts of stuff, and tougher penalties for young kids who are the ones who are predominantly responsible for these ram raids. I mean, some of them are 12 and 14 years old.
Responsible for what?
Sorry, ram raids, smash and grabs. We call them ram raids in New Zealand. You drive a little car into a shop. It's dreadful. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go to Andrew with a similar question in terms of what the agenda is, but I'm going to let Veronica know that we're going to take questions from the audience. And so if you have a question, please put your hand up, and Sadie actually will bring a microphone to you. So if you have a question, please put your hand up. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep going with the discussion. So Sadie, let me know when we have a question. In the meantime, Andrew, as you're putting a platform together or a manifesto, how do you make the case for the Liberal Party should be back in charge, given that you were in charge 2 years ago? Albanese's done some things and so on. Do you want to roll back? Do you want to explicitly roll back some of the things that he's done, or they're just a completely different agenda? What's the agenda going forward?
Well, the Ronald Reagan question of do you feel better off or worse off than you did 3 years ago, I suspect will be a large part of the formula, because a large part of the campaign will likely be fought on the economy, on cost of living, on how voters are feeling in their everyday lives, because on many, many metrics, whether it's inflation, whether it's in terms of real incomes, whether it's in terms of the amount of tax Australians are paying, all those things are going in the right direction. And we find a lot of our communications, international comparisons are very powerful. So I think we've got the second worst inflation of major advanced economies. As I said, real incomes have dropped, and the tax take on Australians has increased significantly. So that is a big part of the arguments we'll be making probably in about 18 months' time when we have our next election. Beyond that, I mean, as Joe says, we've got to be resolutely focused on the issues that people are focused on. In Australia at the moment, yes, it relates to the economy and cost of living. Energy prices is a big part of it. Housing, access to housing, has probably developed in Australia as an issue in a way that it hasn't for decades in terms of availability and accessibility. Obviously, keeping Australians safe in a dangerous world. We've got our government tying itself up in knots with a very, very ham-fisted response to immigration detainees being released into the community. Many dangerous convicted criminals following a High Court judgment. So national security will be an important part of our platform as well, just given how badly the government is handling that issue at the moment. I'd imagine the first 9 months, and we'll probably have an election in March or May 25, but it could be as early as August next year. So the first 6-9 months of next year will be a big part of the Liberal opposition setting out its alternative manifesto, and I'm pretty confident it will focus on those areas. I think another area is standards in schools, the quality of the curriculum and the quality of the teaching children are receiving in our schools, because again, on another metric where we're just not doing good enough at the moment, doing well enough, I should say.
Let's go to the audience. Let me just please stand, state your name, who you're with, and make it a question. And also indicate who you're posing the question to.
Yeah. Santiago Acosta. I'm originally from Venezuela, but now working in Chile with Idea País, a think tank. And my question would be, what's the next step? I mean, you already won general election, you won in your referendum in Chile, happened the same. So now that you have that scenario where you won, how are you going to keep working in order to make this sustainable and to be in power, even when, you know, the opposites are going to try to come again?
Shall I start? It's a good question, and we talk about that a lot because we don't want to. Our plan isn't just to win this election. We want to win in 26, and we want to win and beyond. We've got a lot of things that our party needs to do. We've got some operational things. We need to do some rules changes around selections. We need to make sure that our party candidates represent New Zealand, all of New Zealand, not just certain aspects of New Zealand. We need to build on the gains that we've made in the last 3 years operationally in our local electorates. We need to keep building our volunteers. We need to keep building our voter ID. And we need to stay resolutely focused on our agenda and the issues for New Zealanders.
Yeah, similar answer. I mean, we've finished the year well. We've had a very good result in the referendum. We're back in a competitive position, having lost in May last year. But it's just a hell of a lot of the hard work of politics. Developing our policies, selecting our candidates, relentlessly holding the government to account on its performance because it's been very bad, and they're giving us plenty of material to work with at the moment. But that's got to be absolutely relentless focus on that. We do a lot of work with our incumbent members as well in terms of making sure that they are going to be in as strong a position next time as possible to hold their seats. So we're not just winning seats, but we're holding seats and winning seats. So it's there's no magic wand. It's just a hell of a lot of hard work on the basics of good politics. Beyond that, I'd just point back to the earlier point I made around, there is a cohort of voters who, for the first time, probably have voted against a big progressive cause, but who we know voted Labor at the last election. And there's a real opportunity to speak to them about our priorities and about our values because we've now got a real area of common ground with them.
I'm going to go to Diego, but if someone else has a question, please put your hand up. Sadie will come over to you. And in the meantime, go ahead, Diego.
No, we are clear that this 62% against the left proposal was a spontaneous rejection against a bad proposal, but we have to transform this electoral victory into a political victory and into a ideological victory. And that's why we're working very hard training young leaders in the universities, in the schools, and in the social sector to promote new candidates. We have a strong opposition against the government of Gabriel Boric. And I have a news for this audience. I think that we will recover the government in 2 years more. And we will have in Chile a conservative government that will be a good news for all Latin America. I hope so.
Let me ask a follow-up.
I will not be the candidate, but we will win.
So that strikes me that the success in Chile, combined with a follow-on general election victory in your next national election, would be a great example of pushing back against this rising populist left-wing red tide. Several of us were in Mexico City for the Foro America Libre, organized by our friends at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, bringing together center-right parties from throughout Latin America to have a united front against this. And it would seem that Chile is well poised for that victory, in part because of the setup that you've created through this, through where we are now. So we're looking at when is the next federal election in New Zealand then?
2026.
So you're in 2026. You're coming up in 2 years. Australia is likely to be next year, and our friends in Canada are well positioned because they're running ahead in the polls. And as Prime Minister Harper said, the only downside there seems to be that the higher the Conservatives are polling, the more they'll drag out the date of the next election. The other team will. And so, do we have any other questions from our audience? Brent Louder.
So this question is for Joe, but anybody else can take it as well. We've seen throughout campaigns that have been successful, there's kind of a personal connection and a kind of an emotional thread that usually is tied to the victory. So I know you did some extraordinary things in social media with the leader and things like that about kind of really connecting on that level. Can you talk a little bit more how you did that and why it was successful?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We our leader's really new. So he entered Parliament at the 2020 election. So he's only been in Parliament for 3 years, and he's been the leader for 18 months or something. So we knew from our research also that New Zealanders needed to know more about him, and they needed to know more about how he made decisions, who he was, etc. So for us, it was about creating really authentic content that let people know who he was. So instead of trying to memorize lines and get the line perfect, they needed to know that he was a guy that they could relate to, which is why some of the content was a bit out there. But like I say, the younger audiences in particular really resonated with that. And then of course we've got the standard channels like Facebook and others that older demographic use, and same thing. We had different content for different channels though. We didn't just run blanket content across the same thing. So that was really important. But just outside of social media, another thing that we did was send them on the road. So we did a series of town hall meetings in the lead up to the elections, 38 I think it was, so that he could practice delivering his stump speech on the hustings to a crowd that we didn't select. We just put an ad in the paper or we advertised it on social and said, come along. And people came along. People genuinely wanted to know about him, and we're small, so our crowds are not 10,000 strong like some people, amazing. But we had people spilling out the door. And again, without the filter of the media, he could deliver his speech and his messages to people directly. So I think that really resonated with people, and they felt like they got to know him.
Andrew, how much Peter Dutton is the leader of the party in Parliament? How much is the next federal election about him, and how much is about who you're voting for in your own constituency?
It's a good question. I mean, it remains to be seen. Voters could be voting on party, on leader, on candidate, on issue. So it just, and it won't be homogenous right across the country. At this point, you would probably suspect that there will be the opportunity to harness a protest vote against the government, just given how tough people are doing it economically. So there's I would guess there's an opportunity to motivate voters to vote against the government. But again, this is probably still 18 months away. Could be next year, but probably early 25. And so a lot of water to go under the bridge. So we'll see. But it'll be different in different places around the country in terms of what emphasis what's the biggest vote driver in voters' minds. But if the election was today, you'd imagine a large part of it would be, there'd be an opportunity to motivate people to vote against the government because they're doing it tough, because the government promised that they'd be better off and they're not, and there's a whole range of broken promises that have been executed by the government, and on just about all those counts, people are worse off as a result.
You have some state elections coming up between now and the federal election. Will Peter Dutton, as your leader, will he go around to those states and campaign in those state elections, or will he stay out of that?
So the next state election is in Queensland, which is in October next year, and that is Peter Dutton's home territory, and it's probably the state where he's strongest in. So I would be very surprised if he's not part of that campaign. So, I mean, traditionally our state and federal we keep pretty separate, just as a general rule. It's a pretty well-educated voting cohort in Australia. They know when they're voting local government elections, they're voting for the mayor. They know state government elections, they're voting for the premier, and federal elections for the prime minister. There's a pretty clear understanding of who you're voting for at each level. But certainly in Queensland, as a proud Queenslander, I suspect Peter Dutton will feature as part of that.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've run in this program precisely on time. So would you please put your hands together and thank our great panel.